Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to the Black Tower Show. I'm your host, Nathan Ford. Jake Fox is in BC Studios, upstate New York. We're broadcasting 1310 WRSB, 1590 WASB. Upstate New York, the sun is shining. It's looking good out there. The Black Tower Show. And we got a great guest on. We're going to have him on again here. Courtney Brown. Dr. Courtney Brown is a mathematician, social scientist, teaches in the Department of Political Science at Emory University, Atlanta, Georgia. Independent of his work at the university, he's also the leading scholar on the subject of remote viewing, as it is done using procedures that were developed by the United States military. We had him on about a month ago, and we talked about the history there, so you can check out all of our interviews that we post up on our page on YouTube, Dr. Courtney Brown. And he's going to come back onto the show to talk about the climate project that he's doing at the Farsight Institute, of which he is the director and founder. Go to farsight.org. Check out Dr. Courtney Brown's, all the work that he's doing there, which is, I don't know, it's so great for humanity. You got to go there and check up and see the work that he's doing at the Farsight Institute. Dr. Courtney Brown, thanks so much for coming on.
Jake, it's my pleasure, and I want to say it's great to be back on your show. It's an honor to be here.
So let's get started with the Climate Project, which ended on June 1st, 2013.
Sure, that was a really interesting and successful project that we had. And to understand it, you need to understand the nature of research that we've done here at the Farsight Institute. We're the biggest science shop venue anywhere dealing with the science of remote viewing as it's done using the procedures developed by the United States military and used for espionage purposes, or methodologies that are derivative of those procedures. So there is no place else you go to see the full-fledged projects worked out. We have done a huge number of really cutting-edge, way out there projects that you just can't get anywhere else. However, the Climate Project attracted a lot of attention recently because it started in June 1st, 2008 and went to June 1st, 2013. It was originally designed to detect small levels of climate change using remote viewing to see if remote viewing could be used to describe something like that. And that was because meteorological predictions were that there would be no major change. Meteorological predictions basically said that there would be, 2013 would be similar to 2008. And just like 2008 was fairly similar to 2003. I mean, it's just, not much change has been going on. But our Climate Project data, which was done with using 113 sessions, which was was at the time the largest data collection project of its time using these type of data anywhere. These sessions were split up between 2008 and 2013 using what we call two different timelines for 2013. You have to understand that we have, we discussed this a little bit in the past, we have investigated the idea explicitly using remote viewing methodologies, the idea of there being what people sometimes call parallel universes, multiple timelines, multiple universes, or other worlds. And our research on that has been published in a leading peer-reviewed scientific journal that you can get on our website, which is www.farsight.org. That's F-A-R-S-I-G-H-T, like seeing far. And if you go down to the bottom of the nav bar, a little bit to the right of it, you'll see a brown banner saying latest peer-reviewed published research. If you click on it, you can read the article. We've published a lot of stuff, but that article sort of summarizes this project, this multiple universes experiment. And basically what it was is it was a test to see if Hugh Everett's ideas. Hugh Everett was a physicist who finished his dissertation in 1957. He studied under John Wheeler at Princeton University. And he did a reinterpretation of quantum mechanics, which at the time was dominated, still is actually, with the interpretation that's commonly called the Copenhagen interpretation, which is that a single reality distills out of a probabilistic ether and it becomes us. And he thought of that as a monstrosity because you had to have an observation mechanism, an external force to distill reality out of it, and you also had a dividing line, this imaginary line of decoherence between the quantum and macro worlds. And it ignored the fact that the macro world is based up of the quantum stuff. But the basic idea that quantum mechanics involves with Hugh Everett's concept is that that other worlds exist simultaneously, potentially an infinite set of other worlds. You and I talking of different subject matter, you interviewing somebody else at this exact same time, things like that. And it's sort of a Star Trekian idea. Mm-hmm. But the mainstream physicists at the time, at 1957, laughed at it, derided it. Mm-hmm. They saw it as a direct threat to the competitive model, which was to the dominant model, which was the Copenhagen interpretation. And Hugh Everett was so disgusted he left physics and went into the Defense Department and developed a huge amount of our nuclear policy. So the idea of other worlds that coexist simultaneously comes out of not anything controversial with respect to the math. I'm an applied mathematician, work in a social science program. I don't do any remote viewing stuff at the university, but nonetheless I am a mathematician. No one disputes Hugh Everett's math. It's the interpretation of quantum mechanics that people disputed. Well, it so turns out that the interpretation did explain some phenomena that were unexplainable to this day, using any other mechanism, in the quantum world, such as the so-called two-slit experiments, these so-called interference patterns. And what basically Hugh Everett did was say these interference patterns, or these things that come out of the quantum mechanical experimental apparatus, are due to things that are occurring that we cannot see in other realms. And that translates up to the macro level. And there is no imaginary line of decoherence because the same stuff occurs on the macro level as well. And in that day, nobody believed it except him. However, things have changed. And as of the current time period right now, 18%, which is actually a lot, of mainstream physicists have adopted the so-called other worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics as the primary paradigm. And that means that the Copenhagen interpretation, or sometimes thought of as alternatively the standard model, is down to 82%. Now, that's still a lot. It's still a majority. Yeah. But those people are essentially older. And they're dying off and retiring and being replaced. But the movement is clearly in the direction of the other world's interpretation. So Hugh Everett will win the day, but it's taking a little longer. But nonetheless, 18% of mainstream physicists, mostly younger physicists, assistant professors, things like that, graduate students, he's the rage. Hugh Everett is the rage among those people because the other world's interpretation pulls so much together. See, basically, physics, mainstream physics, no physicist has ever found anything solid. Never, ever. You can say, well, my computer is solid, my desk is solid, my body is solid, but the reality is those are all empty space made up of molecules, and inside the molecules are atoms, and inside the atoms are subatomic particles, and when you dig and dig and dig and keep digging, you never find any solid billiard ball type of thing that's solid. All you find is energy patterns or waves that interact among themselves. So all you have anywhere in the universe are waves. You have a frequency-based universe. Nothing else has ever been discovered. And the waves interact through principles known as positive, as constructive and destructive interference, causing things known that physicists like to call with the word superposition, when the waves sort of come together and form a distortion in space-time reality. And then what we are very complicated ensembles of these superpositions. So you and I and everything else you see is nothing more than energy wave stuff. No one's ever found anything solid. And you can say, well, look, how can that be? Well, you listen to the radio, and you're getting sound out of the radio. You know that there's other frequencies on the dial that the radio is screening out. Yeah. and they're not bumping into one another, but the sound is real. When you look at the TV, and if you put a dog or a bird in front of the TV, they'll think that they're actually watching somebody. And if you look at a bird, birds like to look in mirrors because they think there's actually a bird inside the mirror. And so, if you look at a TV, you can say, well, look, that's not a real thing. Mm-hmm. Well, we're getting pretty close to the time when we'll have 3D TVs, where it'll look as real as day. And you'll have some primitive person come in and say, oh my gosh, there's another person standing in your living room. And you'll have to explain to them it's not a real person, it's just the TV. It's just wave patterns interacting. So the point is, everything that we see are just wave patterns interacting. And the brain, the human brain, is nothing more, well, it's actually a really great hologram generator, which means that it sorts out and screens out all other frequencies except the ones that it wants you to see, the ones of the here and now. That means that the past and the future are still there, but you can't see them because it's being screened out. And the remote viewing works because over long periods of time, remote viewers train to get the brain to allow in things that it otherwise would be screening out, and remote viewers pay attention to that. And so that's how come the remote viewing process actually works. Just like if you go to the Olympics and you see people running and jumping and swimming in ways that you can't do. Well, they practiced. They figured out how to make their bodies do things. Similarly with remote viewing, we figured out how to make the brains do things just by perceiving stuff that it otherwise was not going to let you do. So basically what we did was we have studied the idea of multiple realities and parallel universes, got a lot of that research published, and then we applied that in the climate change, which meant that we knew from the very beginning that we could not predict the exact future of 2013 from the perspective of 2008. We knew that going into the project because of our other worlds or multiple universes interpretations of our research. However, the basic idea was, if at every moment of the now, like now and now and now and now, the future is branching off into a potentially infinite set of other futures, all of which don't interact with one another because they're out of sync on a level of frequency, just like one station on the dial of your radio is out of sync with the other station of the dial, and they don't bump into each other. So, but if all those things are branching out from every moment of the now, there is no single future. Period. Full stop. End of story. It is impossible to predict a single future because a single future does not exist. Multiple futures exist. Only multiple. And so, from the perspective of 2008, we said, well, let's describe what we think might be climate change in 2013. And lo and behold, big stuff showed up in our project. I mean, really, absolutely, totally unpredictable any other ways. Huge climate change. I mean, like right off the scale climate change. And what looked like interactions with meteors, impacts of meteors, causing like waves. So that was a great thing to have happen in our experiment because we were really struggling with the idea of trying to detect small change, and suddenly big change happened. Now we had perfect randomization between the 2008 and 2013, two different timelines we were defining, neither of which was going to be ours, but we were hoping that if anything big did happen in 2013, we would be able to detect something that would be correspondent with our own future. Meaning the details would be wrong, but some evidence that's unambiguous would come through that would match. And so there is no problem getting the details right with remote viewing for the present, for concurrent targets that are concurrent with the present, meaning at the same time, or targets that are in the past. Because if there's multiple time streams, in the past, you know exactly which time stream you want, where say the Titanic actually sunk. So, but the future, you don't know what's up in front, so you don't know what future you're going to get. So we were trying to experiment with two different timelines going into the future and wondering if there might be some unambiguous correlation between stuff that's in 2013 and what we were getting. And what we got was this huge climatic changes plus meteor impacts, so meteor events of some type. So we said, well, that was like totally like off the wall, unexpected, but it was great from the experimental point of view because it was unambiguous. And so what we did was we waited for 5 years. We had perfect randomization. All the 2008 sessions were perfect. They described 2008, usually coastal areas that were ecologically fragile, but they described them perfectly, like airports, islands, a couple of things that were inland, such as top of Mount Kilimanjaro. But basically, everything was as it was supposed to be. Tourists were still going to the beach, having a good time, etc. 2008 looked like Armageddon had happened. The weather had changed dramatically, awful weather all over the place, and these meteor things. So what happens is we waited. And then, as we got close to 2013, weird things started to happen. The weather went bonkers. I mean, the weather, you don't need me to tell you that the weather on this planet is not okay. It's totally unpredictable from the perspective of 2008. The weather that we're seeing now is just unbelievable. In fact, the United Nations is coming out with a report, the first draft of which is already available, is already existent, and much of it, or parts of it, were published already by The Economist, to the United Nations' great dismay. But the basic idea is the powers that be are actually trying to water it down right now, because it's been said that it scares the wits out of everybody, that extreme climate change is the norm now. And what we did is, with our climate project, we have one of our great remote viewers, Daz Smith. He created another website called www.climatechange2013.com. And if you go to that website, he catalogs the major climatic events that have been pestering us over the last few years, story after story after story, whether it's the evacuation of Calgary, Alberta, whether it's extreme flooding in China, whether it's historic, unbelievable flooding all throughout Europe, India, entire towns being rushed down with scenes that look like they were out of a Hollywood movie, with rivers just literally taking entire towns away. I mean, it's extreme. And with the Oklahoma tornado, and every time and flooding all throughout Europe, and every time one of these events happens, it's followed by another event, week after week. And none of this is normal, nor was it predictable in 2008 using any meteorological capabilities. So, from that perspective, the climate project was dead on. And now what about the meteor stuff? The meteor stuff is different. Mid-February 2013, just a few months ago, we had two absolutely once-in-a-lifetime, or once in every 2 or 3 lifetime events, meteor events, where we had the near miss of DA-14, which flew underneath the orbits of our own satellites. I mean, it was razor thin. It missed us by a whisker. And we also had a major meteor crash in over Russia. Now, the weird thing about this whole thing, and that all happened within 24 hours, the really weirdest thing about the whole thing is that everyone has video cameras these days, and there were videos of the Russian meteor all over the place. And one of the videos in particular showed a really clear picture of the meteor overhead, and something came from behind the meteor and impacted it, smacked it, fragmented it, and blew pieces of it out in front of it. It's very clear on the video, and actually, that could only have occurred one of 3 ways. It either had to be another meteor that came in and hit it. The probability of that happening is so small, in my view, you can just dismiss it. Or it could have been an anti-ballistic missile system. And there was a Russian general the next day who actually said that's what it was. And that report was pulled immediately, because that would have raised all types of issues of weaponization of space, and so they couldn't just do that. But that's a possibility, that it might have been a Russian or a U.S. anti-ballistic missile system, a secret, of course. But, if that did happen, human technology isn't that good. So, if that did happen, they would have had to have been ready. They would have had to have had the guns drawn, triggers cocked, ready to go, which means they would have had to have been set on guard. And one of the ways they could have done that is through looking at our climate project. Now, we do know for an absolute fact the military, the Defense Intelligence Agency, they do look at our projects with very close interest. I mean, we have some of the military people on our board of directors. I mean, it's not even a hidden secret. I mean, the military people look at our stuff. And if they saw this stuff coming in, and they do respect the remote viewing stuff tremendously. So if they saw this stuff that we were doing coming in, they're very intelligent people, they would have acted on it. And if they did have anti-ballistic missile capabilities, they would have been ready, because they knew this would have been the alert to say, do that. However, there is another possibility. One of the worst kept secrets on the planet is that there is extraterrestrial communication or contact between the U.S. and perhaps the Russian and perhaps another government on the planet, and in exchange for stuff like technology transfer, in exchange for things that the ETs may be of interest in. And that will eventually come out. But the idea is, if you were a military person and you saw this climate change stuff, what would you have done? Well, the first thing you would have done is gone over to the ET people and said, hey, look, you're working with us, we got cooperation, if this stuff is coming, deal with it, okay? So the Russian thing could have been done by an ET craft. So that's one possibility. If there was intervention with the ET, with that meteorite, and if the ETs, for example, did anything with it, which is technologically possible from their point of view, then it is clearly possible that they could have nudged DA-14 when it was farther out. Just, you could have spit on it when it was farther out, and that would have modified the orbit enough to, move it a little bit and make it miss the planet just by a hair, which is what happened. So, if you do have intervention, and by the way, that DA-14 did approach us from the southern hemisphere. If it did impact the Earth, it would have matched our climate project data exactly with respect to all the impact stuff. So if you did have intervention, that's an example of how you create alternative timelines. You take information from the future, you bring it back to the present, and then you act so that that doesn't happen. That's why the military is interested in remote viewing in the first place. If you see a terrorist event, you bring that information back to the present, you go out, you arrest the bad guys, and the terrorist event doesn't occur. That means it does occur in another timeline that's just as equally real as the one you and I are talking with right now. Exactly, there's no difference between them other than the fact that different things happen on them. And so that was the nature of our research. So from our perspective, we have the following. The Climate Project in 2008 predicted extreme weather that was totally unpredictable and absolutely dramatic, and we got it. We nailed it dead on. We also predicted some type of meteor events that were correspondent. There was some type of once-in-a-lifetime, this doesn't happen normally, absolutely unambiguous meteor events. And in fact, that's what we got. In fact, the meteor that was over Russia, had it not been fragmented by being hit from behind, it would have hit intact, and that would have created an explosion that have been equivalent to 50 nuclear bombs of the size that destroyed Hiroshima. So that would have been an absolutely unbelievable explosion. So what we're having here is an extremely successful climate project. By the way, for those people who didn't hear, in mid-February 2013, on February 16th, right after the two meteors came in, I issued an announcement on YouTube and on our webpage that those meteor events met the criteria of our climate project, and thus, since they were so rare, no further meteor events should be expected between mid-February and June 1st, 2013. And thus, the tsunami, the impact stuff should not occur. And I issued that on February 16th, and that was exactly correct. It was perfect prediction in that regard. So sort of a combination with reasonable predictive scientific analysis and also the remote viewing data led to some really great stuff. So if you didn't hear that announcement in mid-February 2013, and then we're waiting for the tsunamis on June 1st, that's not our fault. You're guilty because you didn't get our free newsletter. So if you don't mind, can I make a small plug for our free newsletter?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
At the bottom of our nav bar at our website, farsight.org, farsight.org, we have a blue banner at the bottom of the nav bar that says subscribe to our free newsletter, and there's no reason not to. First, we never give the email addresses out to absolutely anybody. End of story, full stop, period. Secondly, we only send out stuff when we have something to announce, which is a major project, which only happens every few months anyway. So there's no spam from us. But if you don't click on that and put in your name and email address, you won't hear the announcements. And so in mid-February, February 16th, when we made that announcement, everybody that was tuned into what we were doing knew that we had an early analysis of the climate project and the meteor stuff was over.
Dr.
And so,
Courtney Brown, our guest on the Black Tower Show, we're talking about the climate project. Like you were saying, go to the Farsight Institute's website. That's FARSIGHT. We're just talking about the climate project. Courtney Brown talking about, and can we get into a little bit about what these sessions look like? If you go to the website and you get this information, you're talking about Daz Smith, who's this talented remote viewer. We're talking about what does the information look like? Well, it could look like
actually,
yeah.
No, go ahead. We have actually on our climate project page, which is in the nav bar, fourth link down, he says Climate Change 2008-2013. Yeah, there's 3 videos. The top video is the summary of the entire project. The middle video is the update that was given on 16th of February. And the bottom one is the original report, where we actually go through the entire project and show what the remote viewing data looked like, which was really very dramatic. One of the things we found out from this project is that
Are you still there?
Courtney?
the most dramatic.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, we
Go
lost you there. Could you go back?
Yeah. Am I back?
Yeah, you're back now. We just lost you for about
Okay.
5 seconds or so.
Oh, okay. Well, one of the things that we found out was that when you're remote viewing the future with multiple timelines, parallel realities, whatever, remote viewers tend to be attracted to the most dramatic of the future timelines. So rather than get a future timeline in which the meteors were deflected or intercepted above Russia, you get the timeline where that didn't happen. But on the other hand, if there was intervention, that intervention wouldn't have happened, theoretically, unless the remote viewers did bring back the stuff where the impacts did occur. So we're sort of in a weird situation, but they seem to be attracted to the most dramatic of events. For example, if you're remote viewing the future and you find an earthquake in an area, you're likely to get remote viewing sessions that describe a horrific earthquake. And if everything is a probabilistic smear, then when that future actually arrives, you may not get such a big earthquake. It might be a significant earthquake, like it'll be on the right day, in the right location, but it won't be devastating, perhaps. And the idea behind that is that the remote viewers seem to be attracted to the timelines in which the most stuff happens, where it's the most dramatic. So that's one of the things we learned about the remote viewing process.
Why do you think remote viewers have that special talent where they're able to kind of project their mind into these different more than other people?
Anybody can do it. The only issue is training. Just as anybody can play the piano, but if you want to play in Carnegie Hall, you got to work at it. So what these remote viewers do, they study these very structured data collection procedures, such as the Hawaii Remote Viewers Guild procedures that are guided under Glenn Wheaton, who came out of Special Forces Intelligence, or controlled remote viewing procedures, which came out of an official program in the Defense Intelligence Agency. And Lynn Buchanan is one of the people that came out of that program and teaches that set of procedures. So they study those procedures, and they, over the decade and a half or over the many years, they learn to pay attention to that. Let me give you an example of what it's like. You're looking at something, like maybe you're looking at your computer screen, or you're looking at your radio, or you're looking at the road if you're driving, or whatever, and you have a regular image. Now, while you're looking at your computer screen or your radio or whatever, bring in the image of a pencil. So you have a pencil that you're looking at as well. It looks like that yellowish, orangish pencil with the sharp point and the pink eraser on the other end, and perhaps the Eberhard label with the number 2 on it. Now, if you notice that pencil is a bit translucent. You can see through it and still see the stuff that you're looking at with your eyes open. So we have 2 different images. We have the images that are coming in through the eyes, the ocular image, and we have the remembered image of the pencil. But the remembered image is dimmer or translucent. Well, the remote viewing images are dimmer still. They're foggier, they're fuzzier than the remembered image. So what the remote viewers get used to doing is looking at these foggy, fuzzy, dimmer images and focusing on them till they get more clear, and ignoring remembered images and ignoring ocular images. That's what they get trained to do. And after a decade of working at this, some of them become really, really scary good, as some people say.
And when you're talking about, from each instant in our lives, like right now and in this next moment, like you're saying, there's an infinite amount of different paths that the future could take. So you would say maybe that the remote viewer, through this training, is able to see perhaps how a lot of these future paths, how a lot of them might look. You might see anomalies that are similar within all of those paths. Like you might see a meteor but does it have to be a big thing that would kind of affect all of those different future paths?
Yes, in order for something that's found in the future to be recognizable in our future, it has to be big, meaning a small detail will be different across timelines. What color shirt you're wearing, things like that, it simply won't match. There'll be too many differences in the details across timelines. But if you get something really big, like climatic change that affects the whole planet, then that will be picked up. Now, the details of that climatic change will be different with what you perceive in remote viewing and what is actually experienced. But the general idea that climate went bonkers will correspond perfectly. And this does not happen when you look at the past. For example, if you're looking at the sinking of the Titanic under totally blind, squeaky clean conditions, the remote viewers are told nothing, just that there's a target, the remote viewer, they will get the sinking of the Titanic. It will be a perfect dead-on session. This idea of multiple timelines affecting how the view, which version that the remote viewer looks at, only occurs with the future stuff. The reason is that the intent of the person doing the target, is supposed to be the focus of the perceptions, is very clear when you're looking at the past, because you're looking at a historical event in a particular timeline, and so you will get exactly that. But with the future, you don't know what's coming, so the remote viewer can get anything. So it has to be a big event for there to be a correspondence between what the remote viewer sees and what actually happens on the ground.
Well, I mean, one of the things that you talk about is gaining recognition for remote viewing. You wonder, in a world where, say, there was a television show where 1 billion people throughout the world were able to think about, or say you had a weekly thing where your remote viewers were talking about potential things that were happening in the future. You could imagine if you had a huge population of people thinking about, meditating about things, and how that you could actually, if what you're saying, if that power does exist, you could actually change the course of history quite dramatically if you had more people involved.
Well, actually, it's a different thing, actually, because according to the theory, which is now at this point really strongly supported by the empirical evidence, all things occur. So there are versions of us in which those things that you described do totally exist. The issue is, how do you steer your current present now into one of those futures that you want to experience? They may all exist, but that doesn't mean you're going to experience it. For example, in the past, according to the theory, there must be a version of the 20th century in which all of the major wars did not occur. Similarly, there must be a version of the 20th century in which World War II ended with nuclear destruction. And so what we have is a situation in which we're in the current now, multiple futures exist, and those things which you were just describing, it's not like you have to imagine them and you want to create them. They already exist. If you can think of them, they exist. The issue is, how do you get your current now to steer in those directions? And that was the fundamental importance of our climate project. It was an experiment to see if we can actually do some directional change, if we can actually do some steering. And the result is positive in the sense that if the results come back and something major is discovered, then it is possible to act on that and redirect the timeline so that you experience a different future. One that already exists, but one that you now drive towards with your headlights on rather than blindly being hit by whatever hits you. So if there was especially a situation of intervention with respect to the meteors, especially with the video of the Russian meteor being so clearly impacted from something, that it does appear that that's exactly what happened. Information was brought from the future to the past or to the present. Actions were taken to prevent something from happening, and in fact, that is exactly what occurred. That's how you get to that type of a thing. It's not that you have to create it. You just have to drive towards it.
Sure. And I think it's, the climate project, when you're dealing with issues like the meteors and those sort of things, those are things that are they seem to be a little bit more definable, and when you're talking about steering, it seems like when you're dealing with the climate, that would be an issue where you'd be able to have a little more control when steering, because it's outside of the realm of like human interactions, which seems to be so much more complex.
The one of the things about that was nice that you're just mentioning about the climate project is it did deal with something that intervention was basically almost impossible to do, which is changing the climate, which is, by the way, one of the reasons we chose the climate project. One of the reasons we picked it as a climate project for detecting change in the future was because we knew the possibility of intervention, changing a timeline. We wanted to do something in which intervention was seemingly impossible. So if there was going to be some change with regard to the weather, we wanted it to be that humans or extraterrestrials or anybody couldn't affect it. And that's what we got. We got what we asked for. So but the meteors were different. They were totally unexpected. And in that particular case, intervention was possible, either through anti-ballistic missile system or ET intervention. But either one, nonetheless, it was unexpected, and intervention was possible. So we got sort of the best of both worlds. We got climate change, which was such that intervention was not possible, so we could just see if the process worked, and it did. It hit it smack on. We were predicting absolutely totally bonkers weather, really horrific stuff, and that's what we've got. And with regard to the meteor stuff, we got clear correspondence between the facts on the ground and meteor events. So, plus possibility of intervention, because, if there were no meteor events whatsoever, then a skeptic could say, okay, you predicted meteor stuff and it didn't happen. So your remote viewing stuff just didn't work. Well, you can't say that, because those things that happened with DA-14 and the Russian meteor, all within 24 hours, they were much greater than once-in-a-lifetime events. They were once in, 2 or 3 lifetime events. Those are very rare events. They happened within the 24-hour period, and the likelihood of that happening again in our lifetime again and our children's lifetime is very little. So that was an extraordinary meteor set of events, and it corresponded perfectly with the idea of meteor events that came across in our data. So those were two things, and it was really a dead-on hit. So for those people who would like to say, well, the tsunamis didn't occur, so remote viewing is just bonkers, and your multiple universes interpretation is just a cop-out to get away from a failed experiment. Those people are basically idiots because you're ignoring the fact that remote viewing the past and present targets doesn't have that problem. And there's a huge extant literature on remote viewing and how it works and with respect to current and past targets. And similarly, it's ignoring the fact that the whole science that we did was based on the assumption of Hugh Everett's interpretation of physical reality with regard to the other worlds from the very beginning. And from the very beginning, we said we will not be able to predict the details. We're looking for major correspondences only, and bang, we got it. So for those people who would like to say it's a cop-out, it's not a cop-out. We said it from the very beginning. And science, when it's done properly, is more often than not, more complicated than the fairy tale interpretation of physical reality that we are taught in universities.
I like, excuse me, I like how you addressed the public criticisms of remote viewing or your own studies. There have been some public criticisms from some, major internet personalities, such as Cliff High, who criticized remote viewing in general based on his own adherence to your June 1st date, based upon his WebBot data as well as your Farsight experiments. He stuck to the June 1st date even after you sent out in your free newsletter saying, actually, Cliff's a good friend of mine, but he was very upset with us basically calling the meteor component of the data on the 16th of February, because he was stuck with that. He was stuck with that date. But the way our project and our science is different than his. He does something different than we do, and the reality is those meteor events were extremely rare. The probability of them repeating between February 16th and June 1st was very, very small. In fact, the odds of having DA-14 and the Russian meteor affect Earth on the same 24-hour period, but according to CNN, 100 million to 1. So the probability of more stuff happening before June 1st was so infinitesimally small, I just simply called it. I said, this does meet what we see on our climate project. We don't have to have the impacts. There will be differences in details, but what we have is absolutely unprecedented in historical time, major meteor events that affected the Earth that were potentially disastrous. We got those in mid-February. That matches our data in essence, and we're done with that part of it. And then I said, from now on until June 1st, there'll be no more meteor stuff as far as our predictions, because that was met. So yeah, Cliff was quite upset by that, but nonetheless, we stuck to it, and it was a perfect prediction in the sense that the meteor stuff, very significant meteor stuff, happened mid-February, and then when we called it and said no more stuff will happen between then and June 1st, that was perfect. That's exactly the way it went. So we're very happy with how that part of the science went. What do you think of the WebBot project and its ability to...
Oh, it's fascinating. The big problem with the WebBot project is that it stopped, meaning Cliff isn't able to get new data, meaning the project is over. So he's working with old data that was done. But the real thing that would be really great is if it could keep on going. The whole idea is that people may remote view subconsciously, and that the perceptions of the subconscious would end up reflecting in the chatter that they have and the words that they use on the internet. Mm-hmm. And if you pick them all up, you can sort of get reflections of these things and use it for predictions in the future. It's a fascinating idea. Right. I wish it had kept going. The trouble was that the internet itself changed, according to what Cliff has told me. And his earlier robots didn't work anymore, and he would have had to reconfigure the entire thing. And a lot of safety things were put into the internet to sort of stop the robots from working properly, with the increased concern about security. And so it just made the project unwieldy, so we stopped it. I think it was 2003. I'm not sure about the date, but it's about 2003 when he stopped the collection process, if I can remember what he said about that. So I like the idea of the WebBot project. I just
wish it wasn't him doing it by himself, and that they were funding to hire a bunch of programmers to fix whatever needed to be fixed so that it could have continued and we'd be getting live data up to today so the experiment could have gone on. But, I admire Cliff for doing what he was able to do when he was able to do it.
Yeah. We're talking to Dr. Courtney Brown on the Black Tower Show, broadcasting 1310 WRSB, 1590 WASB. I love talking. Let's keep the interview going. If you got time, I got time. I'm enjoying this because I want to talk about some of the your project here that shows that there's now we've had Michael Cremo on the show, and it was one of my favorite interviews with Michael Cremo when we were breaking down civilizations that lived here on Earth a million years ago, and this idea that they're technologically advanced, and all of the evidence that Cremo brought was so fascinating. And I want to get your take, and I want to know about this project and the information that's coming out.
That is, you're talking about the Atlantis project. It's one of the most interesting projects we've ever done. It's drop dead interesting. The only thing is, let me ask you a question. I can come back to another interview to cover that exclusively, or are we off the air, or is it still going on, or how is it going?
No, we're live. Let's keep going.
And so you're okay with that, with still going live? Sure, okay, then I can go into that then. I just want to make sure, because I want to make sure if we touch into the Atlantis project, I want to make sure we have enough time to actually discuss it.
We have plenty, plenty of time. If
you are short on time, just let me know and I can come back.
All right.
So the issue with the so-called Atlantis project is we're totally ignoring the whole idea of Atlantean mythology, meaning the whole idea of whether Atlantis was according to the legend or something. That has nothing to do with anything we've done. It's just that we have started out with some Google Earth images. And these Google Earth images clearly show what looks to me like the ruins of an ancient civilization on the bottom of the ocean. And the real strong images that we were basing our project on are about 1,000 miles west of Portugal and Morocco, 3 miles deep in the ocean. And there was another anomaly at the bottom of the ocean off the coast of Antarctica, which is a checkerboard pattern of holes in the ground in a perfect rectangular order, like a checkerboard, clearly artificial. I mean, they're not whale droppings. And so what we did, and you can see the actual data for this project, was just the data been up for a few months, but we just released a couple of weeks ago a DVD that sort of pulls it all together, called the Atlantis: The True Story. What we did was we conducted a remote viewing project using two of the best military-grade remote viewers on the planet, Dick Algier and Deborah Duggan Takagi, to go back and under totally blind. Remember, remote viewers can only do their work under totally blind conditions, meaning they cannot know anything about the target whatsoever. Totally blind conditions, not knowing anything other than there is a target, remote view it, period, full stop, end of story. They describe these things at the bottom of the ocean, and they describe them now as they are, and what they were at the peak before they were at the bottom of the ocean, and what they were like at the moment when they went under. So we got those 3 time periods. And what basically we find is that there was an ancient civilization. It was not aliens in a distant planet. It was us. They were our ancestors. That is us. And we now know the whole story of what they were doing. It was a technologically advanced society, about 100 years more advanced than we are today. And we have a good idea of when this happened. It happened about 70,000 years ago. This totally flies in the face of traditional paradigms in mainstream archaeology, which is bonkers anyway. And I'll explain why. I'm not just saying that. I'm not just bad-mouthing it. But everything you're taught in archaeology school at the universities is just crazy stuff. And I'll explain why just in a few moments. But the basic idea I want to convey first is that while we were looking at this, we had this whole remote viewing phase of the project, took about a year. As we were wrapping up the final remote viewings, Google Earth announced a new version, 2.0. Now, with the first version, 1.0, of their underwater imagery, some scientists, oceanographers, were saying that the anomaly under the water off the coast of Morocco and Portugal were the result of lines caused by what they call ship tracks. Ship tracks, well, all of these underwater imagery are caused by sonar imaging done by boats that are under contract by the U.S. Navy. So these are all U.S. governmental data. And the boats travel in overlapping parallel lines to cover the ocean bottom. If they don't have overlapping parallel lines, parallel, paths, they leave what's called a ship track. A ship track it sort of looks like a railroad track. In the middle, between these two parallel lines, you have really high resolution, clear imagery of what's on the ocean bottom. Outside of the two parallel lines is foggy. So a ship track is really very clearly identifiable. Clear stuff in the middle of two parallel lines. Outside of that, foggy, fuzzy stuff. And the ship traveled directly over the ship track. That's why it's clear right underneath wherever the ship traveled. That's what a ship track is. Well, I looked at this imagery on the bottom of the ocean in Google Earth, and I said, those aren't ship tracks. Any idiot can see that those are not ship tracks. I know what ship tracks look like. I've seen zillions of ship tracks. Those are not ship tracks. And so this project started with simply a disagreement between some scientists who were saying those had to be ship tracks, and me who says, I know ship tracks. Those are not ship tracks. And so, and by the way, I am not saying that ship tracks don't exist. I was just saying, in my opinion, those are not ship tracks. And so, just as we were finishing up our remote viewing part of the project, Google Earth announced its version 2.0, and as you can imagine, most of the anomaly on the bottom of the ocean off the coast of Morocco and Portugal disappeared. And oceanographers, scientists said, see, we cleaned, the data have been cleaned up. Well, I looked at that, and the anomaly was not completely gone, but its glaringly obvious elements were no longer so glaringly obvious. And I looked at them and I said, nothing was cleaned up at all. Look at that. And I looked at it, and it was very clear to me that what had happened was extreme compression algorithms were applied to the ocean bottom data. Now, raw imagery has enormous file sizes, so Google Earth must deal with compressed imagery, which normally causes no problem. But if the imagery is too compressed, what you get is large patches that follow pixel lines that have the exact same color. So there's no color gradient. And you can see it if you convert it into gray, so you can see just grayscale. The color gradients or the shades disappear and just get one. And when I look at the anomaly on the bottom of the ocean, 3 miles deep, 1,000 miles west of Morocco and Portugal, that's exactly what I see. And I have those images up on our website. If you go to our website, farsight.org, because we're a nonprofit, and click on Atlantis, the third link at the top on the nav bar, you can see the images too, and you can see the large patches where the color gradients completely disappear. So nothing was fixed at all. Now, I am not saying that any individual, institution, or anybody else acted to corrupt Google Earth data. I am not saying that. What I'm saying is these are governmental data, and governments keep secrets for whatever reasons, and they can do whatever they want with the data before any scientist or institution gets their hands on it. And in my opinion, nothing was fixed with the Google Earth underwater data. The only thing that happened was that the anomaly was exposed to extreme compression algorithms, which wiped the detail away. So what we have here is a puzzle. By the way, the Antarctica anomaly had the same problem, but the rectangular holes are still visible in the new version, but not as glaringly obvious. Same thing. So what we have here is a puzzle, and we said, in this day and age of digital manipulation of imagery, even a teenager can do wonders with Photoshop. So you can't trust any image. So this is why we said we had to go back and look at our own data. And we got the entire story. It is the most unbelievable, riveting story, and it is so crucial that everybody understand it, because it was not a natural occurrence, a natural phenomenon that destroyed that civilization 70,000 years ago. It was the people themselves. And I can get into it a little bit. Do we have time?
We have time. Let's get into it. Even if we go long, we're going to record this. We're going to put it out there for people to hear the story. Let's continue.
The basic idea is that they had a source of energy back in those days. It was basically a crystalline form of energy where they had crystalline reactors. It was extremely clean, much better than anything we do with nuclear stuff. And they were also experimenting in a secrecy-cloaked science project with other energy coming from the Earth. Geothermal type stuff. But basically what they had done is the following. Our planet is not a good planet to live on. Everyone thinks our home planet, Earth, is wonderful and everything. This planet is not a planet to have a long-term civilization on. It's without dispute, every 25,000 years or so, we have a magnetic pole shift that disrupts everything with earthquakes, volcanoes. We have solar events, Carrington type events, which basically knock us down to ground zero every 10, 12,000 years. This has been documented thoroughly by Robert Schoch, S-C-H-O-C-H. He's a Boston University professor, and he's got a new book out called Forgotten Civilization, where he goes through the data of ancient civilizations that date way past the pyramids, and all of this is not taught in the university level. So mainstream archaeology is just bonkers with regard to this. They have a theory of civilization being a recent phenomenon only because they ignore so many things that are they connect the dots, but they only connect the dots they want to look at. All the other dots that they don't want to look at, they ignore. So, but, Robert Schoch goes through this in great detail, as also does Michael Cremo, who you mentioned, in his really treasure trove of a book, a real fat book called Forbidden Archaeology, where he details all of the archaeological finds that are screened out, that are not taught at the university level, because they simply throw the entire story, Disneyland storyline that the mainstream archaeologists posit, it throws it into the trash, because the facts of the things that have been dug up call everything into complete question. Modern civilization is not new. It's just that human civilization gets ground to a pulp every few thousand years for whatever reasons, the natural causes. But 70,000 years ago, it wasn't a natural cause. What happened is that civilization, which was about 100 years more advanced than our current civilization, our ancestors, they decided to drill through the crust. Now, this planet is not a good planet to live on. It's an 8,000-mile diameter ball of molten rock. It's an 8,000-mile diameter ball of molten rock, and it has only an 8-mile thick crust on top of all of that. It is horrific, if you think about it, in terms of long-term. Magnetic pole shifts, which occur every 25,000 years, will disrupt the lava stuff tremendously, causing all types of disruptions. The sun is very active, and it causes all types of Carrington type events for an advanced society. And we also have a very thick atmosphere that has really bad weather phenomenon. And so what we have is a planet that's really good as a botanical or zoological project, but it's not good for a long-term civilization that needs 1 million years of uninterrupted steadiness in order to develop fully. We get ground down to a pulp every few thousand years, and we forget our history and so on. But what the so-called Atlanteans did is they started to drill. They drilled right through the crust with these huge drilling apparatuses in an attempt to get to the heat in the center of the Earth. It was a secrecy-cloaked experiment. They knew there was a risk. The scientists poo-pooed the risk, just like the scientists and businesses poo-pooed the risk of building the Fukushima Daiichi plant and all the other technological things that we know. That's what they do. And they did it in that case. And what happened was they popped the balloon. The whole planet is a balloon of high-pressure molten lava on a very thin crust. They popped it, and what happened? They blew a hole on the side of the planet approximately the size of Australia. And they had a few days warning that was going to happen. The remote viewing data is so clear on that. We have a DVD that actually pulls it all together and ties it all that nicely, and it's called Atlantis, The True Story. You can watch the first 15 minutes of it for free on our website just by clicking the Watch Now button if you go to the Atlantis link, or right on our homepage there's a big banner right in the middle saying for the Atlantis Project. You can click on that and get to the same thing.
It's interesting that you say that they knew for a couple of days.
Yeah, they knew that it was going to happen for a few days. We know this because they had people watching computer monitors, same type of stuff we have now, flat screen, big computer monitors, very similar to what we have now. They didn't know whether to laugh or to cry. Some of them started to pray for the first time. They saw what was actually happening. They had enough time to announce over loudspeakers to people who were assembling on the ground outside, both down near the Antarctica region, everywhere, but also in that area that's now off the coast of Morocco and Portugal, that this was happening. And they managed to organize people to go to boats. Now, they put women on the boats. Fecund women who were pregnant, capable of childbearing, and the men that were allowed to go on the boat were only enough to actually sail the boats.
You're saying this is a worldwide thing happening?
It was a worldwide thing, but they had enough time to sort of get the information out because they realized it was a potential extinction level event that they caused their own science. Now, the scientists themselves who did it, they also died. Everybody died. Now, why do we know it's 70,000 years ago? Because there was an event that occurred 70,000 years ago that's really not in dispute among mainstream scientists. It's often referred to as the Toba catastrophe theory, T-O-B-A. You can look it up in Wikipedia, for example. And the Toba catastrophe theory says that there was a volcanic event that occurred 70,000 years ago that killed off all humans on the planet except for 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 surviving pairs. Now, there may have been a few more humans that survived, but they weren't breeding. They weren't having babies. The people who were having babies was 2,000, 4,000, 6,000 pairs of people. And everyone on the planet today, from the Aborigines to people in Africa, to people in Europe, to people in South America, everybody are all related to the same 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 pairs of survivors from that event of 70,000 years ago. This is what the geneticists have been able to tell us. Now, they call it the Toba catastrophe theory in reference to Lake Toba in Indonesia. But the reality is they don't know where it happened. All they know is that there was a large volcanic event, and they don't know what caused it. It was unprecedented. Something blew a big hole in the side of the planet, and it killed off everybody. Well, that essential element of what they're talking about matches what we have exactly. But what we know now, it was not a natural blowing out of the planet's side. It was us. We did it. Our own secrecy cloak science. That's why it's so important. By the way, we're a non-profit. We have very few resources. We have a couple $1,000s in the bank. We don't have any National Science Foundation grants. And this is the most unusual group of volunteers that you'll ever see that are producing more information. This will be mainstream stuff taught at the university level in 50 years. But for right now, you get it here and only here. So people that want to help us and support us, they really do so by doing things like buying that Atlantis DVD. We've put out a few DVDs, but that's probably our best production value DVD, the best one we've done, and it's a riveting story. There's even a live session, remote viewing session done by Dick Allgaier on a whiteboard where he, under totally blind conditions, you see him actually sorting it through and describing this stuff on the bottom of the ocean, in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean off the coast of Morocco and Portugal. And you get him describing this thing and saying, in detail what this stuff is underneath. And it's a must-see. If you have any interest in remote viewing at all, or interest in the past of our society, it's a must-see. So the reality is our civilization is not new of 3,000 years ago. The archaeological evidence on that is overwhelming. That is not taught in the mainstream science is a pity. It's not taught at the universities. It's a pity, but that's going to change anyway eventually. And if all you have to do is look at books like Michael Cremo's book, Forbidden Archaeology, or Robert M. Schoch's book, SCHOCH, Forgotten Civilization, the Boston University professor. You'll find that there's tons of archaeological stuff out there that you can actually visit as a tourist that doesn't fit any of the stuff that's taught at the major universities or all universities. And you can really see how incomplete what is taught at the universities actually is. So if you want to know more about what actually did happen, you have to get it from people like Michael Cremo, Robert Schoch, or ourselves at the Farsight Institute using remote viewing. But remember, we're not just saying there was an Atlantean civilization. We're looking at very, very, very clear Google Earth imagery that says basically the same thing. And then we're explaining what that imagery is all about. It's because the imagery led to remote viewing results of a technologically advanced human society that we decided to call it the Atlantis Project. It's not because we had that in mind when we went into it, but when we got the results back, it sort of matched the basic idea of an advanced, technologically advanced society in the past that destroyed itself by digging into the earth. It matched that. So that sort of elements within the legend of Atlantis. So that's why we called it the Atlantis thing. But we're not buying into the Atlantis mythology, but it helps convey in just a single word what we do find. But what we do find is absolutely riveting. And I must add, if you don't mind me saying this, it's so important that people watch this, both look at our data, look at the 15-minute free thing, and then watch the whole thing on the DVD, because secrecy-cloaked science is what we do now. History repeats itself. We're doing the same thing all over again. Whether it's genetically modified foods, building of unsafe nuclear power plants, all over the world we have nuclear power plants, for example, that have spent fuel rods contained in swimming pools on the grounds of those nuclear plants. And just like Fukushima Daiichi plant exposed, there's no safety net for those spent fuel rods. Those plants are totally unsafe. And just like what we have with those types of things, we're repeating the same types of things now. Now, mainstream scientists and governmental authorities, they don't like it when this type of information comes out, because it alerts people to say, well, we have to give some oversight to what mainstream science is doing. Because once you develop technological tools, you can do all sorts of things, such as destroy the whole planet. And mainstream scientists and governmental people, they don't like that. They don't like the prying eyes, the bureaucratic oversight, the delays, the committees and stuff, the public sort of getting involved with their experiments. They like doing things on their own, and so they like to ridicule people who question them. They like to dismiss it, to poo-poo it. But the reality is, they destroyed our entire world just 70,000 years ago, and they're doing the exact same thing now. I am a scientist. I love science. I love mainstream science. There's nothing wrong with science. But the issue is, there is a cost to doing science. And part of that cost is keeping the public informed with what you're doing. I don't have any problem with science. What I have a problem with is secrecy-cloaked science for the purpose of doing whatever they want to do, and then trying to push the dissenting public opinions away by ridicule, poo-pooing, by maintaining secrets. I don't like that, because if the experiments they were doing were inconsequential, that's one thing. But the experiments that they're doing with the technology that's available, and increasingly available, affect everybody. Mind you, 70,000 years ago when they destroyed the planet, the scientists killed themselves also. So it's in their own interest, their own survival. I mean, they died as well. For example, they also had, we have a very clear set of images on this, when the event happened, they had a civilian leader, like a president, and the military led that leader to a safe bunker. when this thing started. Now, the bunker didn't save that guy. Everybody died. But the point is, they had what they thought were secure capabilities. It didn't help them at all. They all died. So it's in not only everybody's interest, but it's in the scientists' interest as well. Secrecy-cloaked science is not a good idea. You have to put up with educating the public. You have to put up, and the public is not easy to educate. You have to agree with the mainstream scientists.
I mean, it's important when you say secrecy. That's something we talk about on the show all the time, because the evil is in the fact that it is secret. So do you see remote viewing, the Farsight Institute, the research you're doing, that if that power was able to be manifest in people, if they were able to practice it and learn it themselves, well, then there would be no secrecy. Then maybe there's a way we could see past the secrecy, and
you're always
kind of maybe it could be used for good. The power could be used.
Well, actually, you're raising a really great point. But there's always going to be a reliance on really good viewers. Just like if you really want to see good or hear good music, you're going to rely on really great musicians that can play in Carnegie Hall. But nonetheless, we are talking about approaching a time in which we have, if not the end of secrecy, we have the minimalization of major secrets, so that we don't have secrecy governing everything we do. Right now we live in a society in which secrecy governs everything we do. I mean, every time there's the slightest leak, you have the American government, for example, going bonkers and trying to chase people across, whether it's WikiLeaks or the Snowden people. You have everybody going bonkers and trying to chase the whistleblower. You have the same thing in Russia. You have the same thing in China. You have the same thing anywhere else on the planet. If you look at our Federal Reserve Board, those decisions are made behind closed doors in secret. If you look at congressional hearings, in secret. If you look at National Security Agency, presidential meetings, all that stuff, everything is done in secret. We govern ourselves on the principle of secrecy. And so we're talking about a fundamental shift in the way humans interact among themselves. Sort of not the end of secrecy, but the minimalization of at least the major secrets. So that's a big shift for human civilization, and it's a potentially totally liberating shift. And it's also important, if this Atlantis Project says anything, it's saying doing it the secret way is going to kill us. We have to change if we are to be a species with a destiny. We've been the secret route before. We are repeating ourselves. We're not doing anything better or new. We're repeating ourselves, and it ended very badly.
This reminds me of a movie that I saw. I just can't help to keep thinking about The Matrix, because that's what The Matrix was about.
Well, actually, that's...
If you had a civilization that was able to, and now we're in the same boat, so we have to assume, obviously, that these people had ways to communicate with each other. You know, they had the internet. They looked just like us. It's hard to believe that after they were destroyed, we somehow came back the same way, though.
You were the species that never dies. Sure. You know, this planet crumbles human society regularly. I mean, if you look at Robert Schoch's work, Robert Schoch, with his book, for example, Forgotten Civilization, he doesn't deal with the 70,000 year stuff, but he does deal with things like Göbekli Tepe, which is the ruins in Turkey. And for example, that's a huge level of ruins, really, really large, very complicated to build, and it looks like it required machinery to build it. And the entire set of ruins, which goes on for, hundreds of acres, I mean, it's huge, it was buried. It was intentionally buried by people. And it was buried 10, 12,000 years ago. So it was intentionally buried, and the evidence seemed to suggest they were trying to protect themselves from something. And Robert Schoch draws a very convincing argument, in my opinion, that they were trying to protect themselves from something that was solar. So it was something like a Carrington event that had happened on our planet in 1859. And the Carrington event released a huge amount of electromagnetic energy that fried our telegraph system, but the telegraph system was all we had. And Robert Schoch clearly goes through evidence that much larger events are quite common, and that they happen every few thousand years, like every 3, 4, 5,000 years. And 10,000 years ago, apparently stuff like that happened. We're also discovering all throughout Britain, going all throughout Europe, an enormous tunneling phenomenon, meaning 10, 12,000 years ago, and the dates are not really in dispute, people tunneled. They produced these very deep tunnels, and we're just discovering all of these tunnels. We're not talking a few tunnels, we're talking hundreds of thousands of miles of tunnels. And they're extending all over the place, and we're just discovering them. And some of them are basically almost crawl spaces, but other ones are things you can walk into. The idea is that people were trying to dig down and protect themselves from something on the surface. And that sort of matches Robert Schoch's hypothesis that the sun on every few thousand years has a fit and produces these solar flare type events. I should also mention that we missed one 2 weeks ago, that in our planetary orbit we passed a solar flare. It was a sort of what they call a coronal mass ejection that went right past us, and we missed it by 2 weeks, meaning if the planet was only slightly different in its orbit, a little bit earlier or later in its orbit, actually it would have been a little bit earlier in its orbit, it would have hit us. And the difference was not like half a year.
Should people feel anxious about this? Like, when you talk to people about this information, like, how are you supposed to... what are we meant to do? I know we're supposed to, support, go to the Farsight Institute, your research that you're doing. People should know about it. Whether they believe it or not, look at it. It's fascinating. I think it's great what you're doing. But, this climate change, we're anxious enough. We live in an anxious time right now.
But listen, we have fear because we know that information is being kept from us. Fear goes away in the presence of knowledge. In the presence of awareness, you're not afraid. If you know everything that's coming down, you can deal with it. Fear is because you are anxious, as you just used. You used the word anxious correctly. And that is undirected fear. And when you're anxious, you're not aware of what you're afraid of. There's no knowledge about it. So what we are saying is that secrecy-cloaked science is the cause of this anxiety. And the cure for that is open awareness. Now, let me just explain. This will sort of make it hit home. Michael Cremo's work, that hugely well-documented, really fat book, is not taught in any university and anywhere. The book by Robert Schoch, the Boston University professor, that's not taught anywhere. These are just descriptions of archaeological finds that don't come out in the peer-reviewed press and are not taught at the university, but they're clear as day. You can take a jet and go see these things yourself. So it's not unambiguous that these things exist. There's no doubt that these things exist, but you don't hear about them at the university. Remote viewing, the subject that I teach, that I research, is not taught anywhere. Remember, I'm a mathematician, so I teach math courses in an applied social science setting. But remote viewing, I'm the leading scholar in the subject of remote viewing as it's done using these military or military-derived procedures. I talk at major universities, but I do not teach this stuff at universities, and nobody else does either. So we have a situation in which the major paradigms of science are totally bonkers. And that is a lot of intellectual garbage that has to crumble and be discarded before this new stuff happens, and that simply takes time. So my suggestion is, every time you do a show like this, every time people watch what we do and find out in detail, that's why I want people to watch the DVD fully, to grasp how profound this stuff really is and important it is to our future. Every time that happens, we are chipping away at the wall that keeps us in ignorance, and we are slowly going to change. So this is the way you do it. You change it by changing one person at a time. And this is the same situation we have with the issue of UFOs, extraterrestrial life. I've sat in rooms with 2-star generals and so on where we talk about the UFOs and extraterrestrial life just like you talk about what's for dinner, without even blinking. But as soon as you go out and you're dealing with the press, everything changes. The military people shut up like a closed clam. Nothing is, everything is, no information is forthcoming. I mean, it's just a crazy schizophrenic world that we live in, but that's the way it is. And we have to get to the point where we have to look at places where we can get that information and have it shown.
If things like remote viewing, if it came out to be very, very accepted out and taught in universities, sort of things, Google's coming for you. They're going to be asking you to work for them. I mean, you can imagine this power could be used kind of in a for like some marketing manager or something would want to get a hold of you.
Well, there will be a time when remote viewing is big and mainstream, but that'll be a good time. But we'll probably look back at this time with fondness and say the time of struggle of getting it to this level was sort of a fun thing. I must say that things have changed. When I started to do this type of work back in the mid-90s, the laughing was deafening. Everyone said I was deluded. The skeptics had a field day making, crazy statements, crazy accusations. So many lies were said about me. That's how I started my own personal website, CourtneyBrown.com, because so many lies were being said about me. I had to put up my own website so I could at least control who I was. And then at least the lies stopped instantly, like within a week, as soon as my website went up, myownName.com. But the point is that now, we're in 2013, for the last few years, nobody's laughing anymore. Nobody is laughing anymore. We're in a situation where it's in a waiting to exhale moment. Remember the movie with Whitney Houston and others,
sure,
where it was like at the lovemaking experience when you're sort of at the very end and you're like waiting to exhale? We're in one of those moments right now where nobody's laughing anymore. And the skeptics are sort of waiting for somebody to come along and sort of knock this out of the ballpark and just sort of grind it to a pulp. And it's not happening. You never bet against a smart guy who never backs down. So what we have is a situation in which everybody who knows anything knows that this stuff is real. Physicists are starting to say, well, we need a mechanism. We need a mechanism. Well, we know the mechanism by which it works. But we're getting to the point now where some physicists are starting to be able to listen to it. Again, 18% of all physicists, mostly younger ones, but still, 18% of physicists in the universities now accept the other world's interpretation, Hugh Everett's interpretation of the physical reality. And that's a lot better than it used to be. So we still have 82%, a vast majority, still going along with the standard model, but they're dying off. They're older. They're going away. And slowly but surely we're doing this. However, I have a feeling that we're being rushed right now. I think the way things are, the way pressures are going, it really looks like physical changes are happening on our planet that are rushing this scenario. I think if we didn't have any physical stress, we could probably go another 100, 150 years without dealing with remote viewing and extraterrestrial life, and the public would slowly be okay with eventually sort of dealing with it 100 to 150 years from now. But I get the feeling that something's happening that I'm not quite sure about, but that it's rushing it. We're doing this in a manner that's a bit premature for the public in general, but that we have no choice over the matter. And so when people actually do look at our research, you're really helping the planet along a lot. That's when people buy the DVD, not only are they helping us, but I really encourage them not just to watch it themselves, but to bring the family in, bring the neighbors in, bring the relatives in, get other people to watch it as well. Once you have it, don't just watch it once. Have multiple showings where you have your neighbors and relatives and family watch it.
Are people able to watch the sessions? I think that would be a huge thing for people to see.
It's unbelievable to actually see it live. And Dick Allgaier is great in front of a camera. He actually did it in front of a whiteboard where you actually see him, and you see him do the session live and saying, what is that? That is it, and this is it. And he describes it. And then at the end of the session, he says, that is one weird place. And then he says, now how did they do that? They couldn't just send a submarine down there and build all that stuff. That had to be done. That is a weird place. And he describes the whole thing. And it matches the imagery on Google Earth perfectly. And it was done under totally blind conditions. I mean, you just can't beat that. I mean, that is worth the price of the DVD, just that alone.
Right.
Anyway, so you not only help us, we don't have much money. And so when we get some money from anything, we're all volunteers. What we do is we spend it on the next project.
Right.
That's how we do these projects.
Well, Dr. Courtney Brown, thanks so much for talking to us. I'd love to keep going. Unfortunately, we're out of time. We'd love to have you back on. All the work that you're doing, we're huge fans, and we'll spread the word about the work that you're doing. Thank you so much.
I want to thank you so much for inviting me here, and I really enjoyed it.